My name is Patrick Cole, and I used to think I was living the American dream. At 46, I owned a successful regional beverage distribution company, had a beautiful house in the suburbs of Milwaukee, and a wife who turned heads wherever we went. Renee was everything I thought I wanted: polished, ambitious, and smart enough to climb the corporate ladder at Prestige Spirits, one of the biggest liquor companies in the Midwest. But dreams have a way of turning into nightmares when you're not paying attention. It started with little things. Renee would guard her phone like it contained state secrets, flipping it face down whenever I walked into a room. She began taking calls in the bathroom, whispering like she was planning a surprise party that would never come. Her work schedule became erratic: late nights, weekend tastings, and business trips that seemed to multiply like rabbits. "Marc really understands the brand vision," she'd say, referring to her boss, Marc Ainsley. "He gets me in ways that, well, you know how it is." I knew Marc. 44 years old, built like he lived at the gym, drove a custom Porsche, and had the kind of smile that made me want to check my wallet afterward. His employees called him the Pumper behind his back, partly for his obsession with weightlifting, partly because he was always pumping up his own importance. The night everything changed was a Friday in October. We were hosting a small dinner party for some of Renee's colleagues. She'd spent the afternoon preparing, wearing a new dress I'd never seen and perfume that definitely wasn't the one I'd bought her for our anniversary. "I'll mix the martinis," she announced, heading to our kitchen while our guests chatted in the living room. "You know how particular everyone is about their drinks." That's when her phone buzzed on the coffee table. The screen lit up with a message notification, and I glanced over casually. What I saw made me freeze. "I miss your scent. Can't stop thinking about this afternoon. When can we be alone again? M." The message was from Marc Ainsley, my wife's boss, the man she'd been praising for months. For a moment, I just stared at the phone. Our guests were laughing about something in the background, completely oblivious. Renee was in the kitchen, ice clinking against glass, as she prepared drinks for people who had no idea they were watching my marriage implode in real time. Instead of rage, something cold and calculating settled over me. I picked up her phone and, using the fingerprint she didn't know I'd memorized, unlocked it. The message thread between her and Marc told a story that made my stomach turn. Months of flirtation, planning secret meetings, intimate details about their work sessions that had nothing to do with quarterly reports. I heard Renee's heels clicking on the hardwood floor as she returned with the drinks. Without hesitation, I typed a response. "Come by at 10 p.m. I have a surprise for you." I sent the message and placed the phone exactly where I'd found it. "Everything okay, honey?" Renee asked, noticing my expression as she distributed martinis to our guests. "Perfect," I said, raising my glass. "Just perfect." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced conversation and fake smiles. I watched Renee charm our guests, telling stories about her innovative marketing campaigns and her wonderful boss who was really pushing the boundaries of traditional brand management. Every word felt like a knife twisting in my chest, but I kept my expression neutral. By 9:30, our guests had left. Renee began cleaning up, humming softly to herself, completely unaware that her world was about to collapse. "I think I'll take a shower," she said, checking her phone. I watched her face change as she read my response to Marc. Confusion flickered across her features, then something that might have been panic. "Actually," she said quickly, "maybe I'll just freshen up a bit. I'm expecting a call from the office." At exactly 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Renee froze in the hallway, her face draining of color. She looked at me, then at the door, then back at me. For the first time in months, she was speechless. "Aren't you going to answer that?" I asked calmly. "You're expecting someone, aren't you?" I walked to the door and opened it. Marc Ainsley stood there, holding a bottle of expensive champagne and wearing the kind of confident smile that suggested he thought he was about to have a very good evening. When he saw me instead of Renee, that smile evaporated. "Patrick," he stammered. I, uh, I was just coming by at 10 p.m. because my wife invited you," I finished. "With champagne. How thoughtful." Behind me, I heard Renee make a small, strangled sound. But I wasn't alone. Standing beside me was my best friend Pete Kowalski, a former Milwaukee police detective who now worked private security. He was wearing his best suit and carrying a leather briefcase, looking every inch the professional mediator I'd asked him to pretend to be. "Mr. Ainsley," Pete said in his most official voice, "I'm here representing the Cole family in a matter of corporate ethics. I believe you know why." Marc's face went white. "I don't know what you're talking about." I handed him a manila folder. "Text messages between you and my wife, dating back 4 months. Expense reports showing company funds used for personal meetings, hotel receipts, restaurant bills, all very interesting reading." Marc opened the folder with shaking hands. His champagne bottle slipped and shattered on our front porch. This is a misunderstanding," he said weakly. "The only misunderstanding," I replied, "is thinking you could do this without consequences. Pete here has prepared a formal complaint for your company's board of directors. Harassment, misuse of company funds, violation of ethics policies. Should make for interesting reading at Monday's executive meeting." Renee finally found her voice. "Patrick, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" I turned to face her. "Explain how you've been using company money to fund your affair? Explain how you've been lying to me for months? Explain how you invited your lover to our home while I was standing right here?" Marc was backing away from our door. "Look, Patrick, we can work this out. Man to man. No need to involve—" "The only thing we're working out," I interrupted, "is how quickly you can get off my property before I call the real police. Pete might be retired, but he still has friends on the force." Marc practically ran to his Porsche, leaving the broken champagne bottle and his dignity scattered across our porch. Renee was crying now, mascara streaming down her cheeks. "Patrick, I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen. It got out of hand." "No," I said quietly. "It got handled. Finally." That night, while Renee sobbed in our guest bedroom, I sat in my study making phone calls, first to a divorce attorney, then to Prestige Spirit's Human Resources Department, where I left a detailed voicemail about policy violations that would be very difficult to ignore. By morning, I had filed for divorce and requested an emergency freeze on our joint assets pending investigation of financial misconduct. Renee's perfect life was about to become very imperfect, and Marc's career was about to take a nosedive that would make his custom Porsche look like a tricycle. But this was just the beginning. I'd spent 20 years building my business by being thorough, patient, and strategic. Those same skills were about to serve me very well in a completely different kind of negotiation. Monday morning arrived like a sledgehammer to Renee's carefully constructed world. I was already at my warehouse by 6 a.m., reviewing delivery schedules and trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy while my personal life exploded. My phone had been buzzing since dawn with increasingly frantic calls from Renee, but I let everyone go to voicemail. Around 10 a.m., Pete showed up with coffee and the kind of grim smile that meant he had news. "Your boy Marc got suspended pending investigation," he announced, settling into the chair across from my desk. "My contact in HR says they moved fast. Apparently your documentation was pretty damning." "What about Renee?" "She's been called in for questioning this afternoon. They're treating it as a potential violation of company policy regarding personal relationships and expense account misuse." Pete sipped his coffee. "How are you holding up?" "Like a man who just found out his wife's been playing house with her boss using company money," I said. "So, not great." The truth was, I felt hollow. 23 years of marriage, and it had all been a lie. At least the last 4 months of it, maybe longer. How could I trust anything now? My phone rang. Renee's name flashed on the screen. You should probably take that, Pete suggested. Hear what she has to say. I answered on the fourth ring. What? Patrick, please, we need to talk. Her voice was hoarse from crying. I know you're angry, but… Angry? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Renee, angry is what I get when the Packers lose. This is something else entirely. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling, work through it. We can't work through fraud, Renee. We can't work through you using company money to fund your affair. We can't work through you inviting him to our house. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, she whispered. How was it supposed to happen? Were you planning to divorce me first? Or just keep lying until I figured it out on my own? Silence on the other end. I'll be by later to get some clothes, she finally said. I'm staying at Janine's. Janine, her best friend and enabler, who'd probably been covering for her this whole time. Take whatever you want, I said. It's all going to be divided up by lawyers anyway. I hung up and looked at Pete. I need to know everything. How long this has been going on, who else knew, what they've been planning. You thinking there's more to this? I'm thinking people don't usually get this sloppy unless they're confident they won't get caught. Which makes me wonder what else they had planned. Pete nodded slowly. I can make some calls, dig around a little. But Patrick, you need to be careful here. Don't do anything that could come back to bite you in the divorce. I'm not planning to do anything illegal, I said, but I am planning to make sure the truth comes out, all of it. That afternoon, I drove to Prestige Spirits corporate headquarters, a gleaming glass tower in downtown Milwaukee. I'd been there before for company parties and holiday events, always as Renee's husband, always playing the supportive spouse while she networked and climbed the ladder. Today, I had a different purpose. I parked across the street and waited. At 4:30, employees began trickling out of the building. I spotted Renee's friend Janine first, a bottle blonde in her early 40s who'd always struck me as the type to know everyone's secrets. I intercepted her in the parking garage. Janine, I called out. She turned, saw me, and her face went pale. Patrick, I heard about… I'm sorry. Are you? Sorry that it happened or sorry that they got caught? She fumbled with her car keys. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. How long have you known? Janine looked around the parking garage like she was planning an escape route. Patrick, I can't. Renee is my friend. Renee is a liar and a cheat who used company money to fund her affair. That makes her a criminal, not just a bad wife. I stepped closer. And anyone who helped her cover it up might be considered an accessory. That wasn't exactly true, but Janine didn't know that. It started about 6 months ago, she blurted out. But it was just flirting at first. I told her to be careful, to think about what she was risking, but Marc was persistent, and he made her feel special. Special enough to steal from her own company? They weren't stealing. They were just creative with expense reports, business dinners that went long, client meetings at nice hotels. Marc said it was normal, that everyone did it. What else did Marc say? Janine bit her lip. He said Renee deserved better, that she was wasted on someone who didn't understand her ambitions. He said he could help her career, introduce her to the right people. And she believed him? She wanted to believe him. Janine's voice was barely a whisper. Patrick, I'm sorry. I should have tried harder to stop her. Yes, I said quietly. You should have. I left her standing in the parking garage and drove home to find Renee packing suitcases in our bedroom. She looked up when I entered, her eyes red and swollen. I need you to know, she said, that I never meant to hurt you. I got caught up in something that felt exciting and new, and I lost sight of what was important. What was important, Renee? Our marriage, our life together, what we built. What we built? I sat down on the bed we'd shared for over 2 decades. I built a business. You built a lie. That's not fair. Fair? I stood up so fast she flinched. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been telling me you were unhappy instead of sneaking around behind my back. Fair would have been asking for a divorce before you started screwing your boss. Fair would have been not using company money to pay for your affair. I know you're angry. Stop telling me I'm angry, I shouted. Stop minimizing this. You didn't just cheat on me, Renee. You committed fraud. You could go to prison. Her face went white. Prison? Misuse of company funds, filing false expense reports, harassment policies. Yeah, prison is a possibility, especially if they decide to make an example of you. She sank onto the bed, suitcase forgotten. Marc said it would be fine. He said he'd protect me. Marc got suspended today. He's not protecting anyone. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I saw real fear in her eyes. Not fear of losing me, but fear of losing everything else. Her job, her reputation, her freedom. What do you want from me? She whispered. I want you to tell me the truth. All of it. How long has this been going on? What were you planning? Were you going to leave me for him? She was quiet for so long I thought she wasn't going to answer. Finally, she spoke. We talked about it, about being together. Marc said his wife didn't understand him, that she was holding him back. We thought maybe we could start over, together. After you divorced me. Yes. And cleaned out our accounts. She looked up sharply. We never talked about taking your money. But you talked about taking half of everything I've worked for my entire adult life. That's different. That's just how divorce works. I stared at her, this woman I'd loved for more than half my life, and realized I didn't know her at all. Get out, I said quietly. Patrick, get your clothes and get out. We'll let the lawyers handle the rest. She finished packing in silence while I stood at the window, watching our neighbor walk his dog. Normal people doing normal things while my world collapsed. After she left, I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat in my study, staring at the wall of photos documenting our life together. Vacations, anniversaries, holiday parties. All of it felt like evidence of a crime I hadn't known was being committed. My phone buzzed with a text from Pete. Found something interesting. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? I typed back, what kind of interesting? The kind that changes everything. Pete was waiting for me at Mickey's Diner on North Avenue, a greasy spoon that served the best coffee in Milwaukee, and asked no questions about why 2 middle-aged men might need to have a private conversation at 7 in the morning. He slid a manila folder across the table as I sat down. Remember how you said they seemed too confident they wouldn't get caught? He said. Turns out you were right. I opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, expense reports, and what looked like a draft of some kind of legal document. My contact in corporate security owed me a favor, Pete explained. Turns out Marc's computer was a goldmine. Want to guess what they were really planning? I scanned the documents, my coffee growing cold as I read. The truth was worse than I'd imagined. They were going to frame me, I said slowly. Bingo, harassment, financial misconduct, the works. They'd been setting it up for weeks. The emails laid out the plan in devastating detail. Marc and Renee had been creating a paper trail that would make it look like I'd been pressuring her into helping me embezzle money from my own company. They'd drafted fake expense reports showing payments to shell companies that didn't exist, forged my signature on documents, even created a timeline of alleged harassment that would have destroyed my reputation and my business. The plan was elegant, Pete continued. Renee files for divorce citing abuse and financial misconduct. Marc, reluctantly, provides evidence to support her claims. You lose everything in the divorce, probably face criminal charges, and they ride off into the sunset with clean consciences and your money. Snake, I whispered. It gets better. Look at the last page. I flipped to the end of the folder. It was a real estate listing for a house in Scottsdale, Arizona. The price was exactly half of what my business and assets were worth. They'd already picked out their love nest, Pete said. Paid a deposit and everything. Using company money, of course. I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. This wasn't just an affair. It was a conspiracy to destroy my life. How close were they to pulling the trigger? According to the timestamps, they were planning to make their move next month. Renee was going to file a complaint with corporate HR claiming you'd been pressuring her to help you cook the books at your company. Marc was going to discover evidence of financial irregularities and report them to the authorities. And I would have been blindsided. Completely. By the time you figured out what was happening, you'd be facing criminal charges and a divorce that would leave you broke and unemployable. I closed the folder and stared out the diner window at the morning traffic. Regular people heading to regular jobs, completely unaware that their neighbor's life had just been saved by a retired cop with good contacts and a suspicious mind. "Pete," I said finally, "how illegal would it be if I decided to return the favor?" "Depends what you have in mind." "I want them to lose everything. Not just their jobs, everything. Reputation, money, friends, future prospects. I want them to understand what it feels like to have your life destroyed by someone you trusted." Pete was quiet for a long moment. "Patrick, I get it. I really do. But you need to be smart about this. You've got the high ground right now. Don't throw it away by doing something stupid." "I'm not talking about doing anything illegal. I'm talking about making sure the truth comes out. All of it." "And how do you plan to do that?" I thought about it while Pete refilled our coffee cups. The answer came to me slowly, like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. "They wanted to play games with corporate politics and public relations," I said. "Let's see how good they are at playing defense." That afternoon, I made a series of phone calls. First to my attorney, who was very interested in the evidence Pete had uncovered. Then to a private investigator who specialized in corporate fraud. Finally, to someone I'd never thought I'd need to call, a public relations consultant who helped businesses manage crisis communications. "Mr. Cole," she said when I explained the situation, "what exactly are you hoping to accomplish?" "Justice," I said, "and maybe a little public education about what happens when people think they're smarter than everyone else." By the end of the week, things began to move very quickly. The corporate investigation at Prestige Spirits expanded beyond simple policy violations to include potential criminal fraud. Marc was terminated immediately, and Renee was suspended without pay, pending a full audit of her expense accounts. But that was just the beginning. The private investigator I'd hired discovered that this wasn't Marc's first rodeo. He'd pulled similar schemes at 2 previous companies, using affairs with subordinates to create opportunities for financial misconduct. In both cases, he'd managed to escape consequences by blaming his partners and positioning himself as a victim of manipulation. "This guy's a predator," the investigator told me. "He targets ambitious women in vulnerable positions and uses them to commit fraud. When things go south, he throws them under the bus and moves on to the next company." "What about his wife?" "Angela Ainsley? She's a piece of work herself. Divorce attorney, specializes in high-asset cases. Word is, she's been looking the other way on Marc's activities because they've been profitable. She gets insider information about companies through his affairs, uses it to position herself for lucrative divorce cases." The picture that emerged was of a couple who'd turned infidelity into a business model. Marc would seduce female executives, gather intelligence about their companies and personal finances. Then, Angela would use that information to build her practice. When the affairs inevitably collapsed, Angela would represent the wives in their divorces, having already identified the most valuable assets to target. "They've been running this scam for years," the investigator continued. "Your wife wasn't their first victim, and she wouldn't have been their last." That evening, I sat in my study with all the evidence spread across my desk. Financial records, emails, witness statements, background checks, enough documentation to bury Marc and Renee so deep they'd need archaeological equipment to dig themselves out. But I wanted more than just legal victory. I wanted them to experience the same public humiliation they'd planned for me. I picked up my phone and called the PR consultant. "I'm ready to go public," I told her. "All of it. The affair, the fraud, the conspiracy. I want everyone to know exactly who these people are." "Are you sure about this, Mr. Cole? Once this information becomes public, there's no taking it back." "I'm sure. They wanted to destroy my reputation to cover their crimes. Let's see how they like having their reputations destroyed by the truth. When do you want to start?" I looked at the calendar. It was Thursday evening. By Monday morning, Marc and Renee's world would be a very different place. "Now," I said. "Let's start now." The story broke on Monday morning, like a dam bursting. The Milwaukee Business Journal led with the headline, "Local Spirits Executive and Boss Accused of Elaborate Fraud Scheme." By noon, it had been picked up by the Wisconsin State Journal, and by evening, it was trending on social media. The PR consultant had done her job perfectly. Every detail was documented, every accusation supported by evidence, every quote carefully crafted to avoid legal liability while maximum damage. The story painted a picture of corporate corruption, personal betrayal, and a conspiracy that would have destroyed an innocent man's life if it hadn't been discovered in time. I was at my warehouse when my phone started ringing off the hook. Reporters, business associates, friends I hadn't heard from in years, everyone wanted to know the details of how I'd uncovered the plot against me. "Patrick Cole is a hero," one of my longtime customers told a reporter. "He's the kind of honest businessman we need more of in this world. What those people tried to do to him is criminal." But the most satisfying call came from Angela Ainsley. "Mr. Cole," she said in the clipped professional tone that lawyers use when they're trying not to scream, "I think we need to talk." "About what?" "About how we can resolve this situation without further damage to anyone's reputation." I laughed. "Mrs. Ainsley, the damage to your husband's reputation is entirely self-inflicted. Same goes for my wife. My understanding is that you orchestrated a media campaign designed to humiliate them publicly. That could be considered harassment. My understanding is that your husband and my wife conspired to frame me for crimes I didn't commit, so they could steal my life savings and run away together. That could be considered a felony." Silence on the other end. "What do you want?" she finally asked. "I want justice, and I want everyone to know exactly who they're dealing with when they encounter your husband. This will ruin his career. Good. Maybe the next woman he targets will think twice before trusting him." I hung up and immediately called Pete. "Angela Ainsley just tried to threaten me with harassment charges," I told him. "Let me guess, she wants you to back off the media coverage." "Exactly, which makes me think they're more worried about public opinion than legal consequences." "That's because public opinion is what's going to ruin them," Pete said. "Criminal charges take time, and they might be able to plea bargain or get reduced sentences, but reputation damage is immediate and permanent. Speaking of which, I have an idea for the next phase." "I'm listening." "Renee's friend Janine has been covering for her this whole time. She knew about the affair, probably knew about the financial stuff too. What if she decided to come clean publicly?" "You think she'd do that?" "I think she'd do anything to avoid being dragged down with them, especially if she thought it might help her keep her own job." That afternoon, I drove to Prestige Spirits and waited in the parking garage again. Janine appeared right on schedule, looking haggard and nervous. "Patrick," she said when she saw me, "I can't talk to you. My lawyer said—" "You have a lawyer now? Interesting. What do you need a lawyer for, Janine?" Her face went pale. The company is investigating everyone who worked with Renee. They want to make sure no one else was involved in the irregularities." "Were you involved?" "No, I mean, I knew about Marc, but I didn't know about the money stuff. I swear." "But you signed off on some of those expense reports, didn't you? As her supervisor?" Janine's hands were shaking now. I trusted her. She said they were legitimate business expenses. And now you're probably going to lose your job because you trusted the wrong person. Please, Patrick, I have kids. I can't afford to lose this job. I felt a moment of sympathy for her, but it passed quickly. She'd had multiple opportunities to do the right thing, and she'd chosen to protect her friend instead. There might be a way to salvage your situation, I said carefully. If you were willing to cooperate with the investigation, tell them everything you know about what Renee and Marc were doing. I already told them everything. Did you tell them about the house in Arizona, the one they put a deposit on? Her eyes widened. How did you know about that? I know a lot of things, Janine. The question is whether you want to be seen as another victim of their scheme, or as someone who helped enable it. She was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks, just like Renee's had that night I'd confronted them. What do you want me to do? I want you to tell the truth, publicly, about how long you knew, what you saw, what they told you about their plans. I want you to help people understand how elaborate this conspiracy was. If I do that, Renee will never forgive me. Renee is going to prison, Janine. Her forgiveness isn't worth much right now. The next day, Janine gave an exclusive interview to the Milwaukee Business Journal. The headline read, "Insider Reveals Details of Elaborate Corporate Fraud Scheme." In the article, she described months of suspicious behavior, increasingly expensive business dinners, and conversations where Renee had hinted about major changes coming to her life. I should have spoken up sooner, Janine was quoted as saying. I was trying to be a good friend, but I ended up enabling criminal behavior. I hope my story helps other people recognize the warning signs. The article included details about the Arizona house, the forged documents, and Marc's history of similar schemes at other companies. By the time it was published, both Marc and Renee had been arrested on charges of conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement, and filing false reports. But I still wasn't satisfied. They'd tried to destroy my life, and I wanted them to understand what complete destruction felt like. That's when I decided to pay a visit to Marc's gym. The pumper worked out at an exclusive fitness club in downtown Milwaukee, the kind of place where executives went to network while pretending to care about their health. I'd never been there before, but I had a guest pass courtesy of one of my customers who was a member. I found Marc on the bench press, struggling with weights that were probably too heavy for him but necessary for maintaining his image. He was alone, which was perfect for what I had in mind. "Hello, Marc," I said, standing over him as he completed a rep. He nearly dropped the barbell on his chest. "Patrick, what are you doing here?" "Working out. Same as you." I sat down on the bench next to him. "Though I have to say, you don't look like you're enjoying yourself." Marc sat up, sweat dripping down his face. "Look, I know you're angry, but—" "Angry?" I interrupted. "Marc, angry is what I was when I found out about the affair. What I am now is something else entirely. I never meant for it to go this far." "Really? So the forged documents were an accident? The shell companies were a misunderstanding? The house in Arizona was just a coincidence?" Marc's face went gray. "How do you know about Arizona?" "I know about everything, Marc. Your whole history, your wife's business model, the other women you've done this to. I know things about you that you've probably forgotten yourself." I leaned closer. "But here's what I really want you to understand. This isn't over. The criminal charges are just the beginning. I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who you are and what you do. Every future employer, every woman you meet, every neighbor in whatever cheap apartment you end up in after your wife divorces you and takes everything you own." Marc tried to stand up, but I put my hand on his shoulder and pushed him back down. Not hard, just firm enough to make my point. "You wanted to play games with my life," I continued. "Now I'm going to play games with yours, and unlike you, I'm actually good at this." I stood up and headed for the exit, leaving Marc sitting alone on the bench, staring after me with the expression of a man who was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what he'd lost. As I drove home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Satisfaction, not happiness. I wasn't sure I'd ever be truly happy again. But the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing justice is being served. But there was still one more move to make. One final humiliation that would complete their destruction and ensure they never forgot the lesson I was teaching them. It was time for the grand finale. 3 weeks later, I was ready for the endgame. The criminal investigation had expanded to include federal charges for wire fraud and conspiracy. Marc and Renee were both out on bail, facing years in prison and financial ruin. Their reputations were destroyed, their careers over, their future prospects non-existent. But I wanted them to face the people they'd tried to deceive. I wanted a public confrontation that would be remembered long after the court cases were finished. The opportunity came in the form of the Milwaukee Business Association's monthly networking event. It was being held at the Pfister Hotel, and I knew both Marc and Renee would be there. Marc because he was desperately trying to salvage some business contacts, and Renee because she was too proud to hide completely. I arrived early and positioned myself near the bar, where I could see everyone who entered. Pete was with me, along with Angela Ainsley, who had agreed to attend as part of her own divorce proceedings against Marc. "Are you sure about this?" Pete asked. "Things could get ugly." "They're already ugly," I replied. "I'm just making sure everyone can see it clearly." Angela was checking her phone nervously. "My attorney says this could complicate the criminal cases." "Your attorney is worried about billable hours," I told her. "I'm worried about justice." At 7:30, Renee walked in wearing a black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She'd lost weight, and there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't completely hide. She looked around the room uncertainly, clearly uncomfortable but trying to project confidence. Marc arrived 10 minutes later, also trying to appear confident but failing miserably. He'd traded his usual expensive suits for something off the rack, and his famous smile looked more like a grimace. I watched them spot each other across the room. They didn't approach each other. Too many people were watching, and their legal troubles had made them radioactive in Milwaukee's business community. At 8 o'clock, I made my move. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, standing up and getting the attention of the crowd, "I'd like to make a brief announcement." The room fell silent. Everyone knew who I was. My story had been front-page news for weeks. "Most of you know about the recent unpleasantness involving my wife and her former boss," I continued. "What you might not know is that they're both here tonight, probably hoping to rebuild their reputations and salvage their careers." I pointed across the room. "Renee Cole, my soon-to-be ex-wife, is standing by the windows. Marc Ainsley, her partner in crime, is near the buffet table. I thought you might like to know exactly who you're dealing with if they approach you for business opportunities." Renee's face went white. Marc started moving toward the exit, but Pete stepped into his path. "You see," I continued, "these two didn't just have an affair. They conspired to frame me for financial crimes I didn't commit. They forged documents, created fake companies, and planned to steal everything I've worked for my entire adult life. The only reason they failed is because they got careless and left evidence on company computers." The crowd was murmuring now, people turning to stare at Renee and Marc like they were exhibits in a zoo. "But here's the really interesting part," I said, pulling out a folder. "They'd already picked out a house in Arizona where they planned to spend my money. They'd calculated exactly how much they could steal, figured out how to frame me for their crimes, and even discussed what they'd tell people about why their marriages had failed." I opened the folder and began reading from the printed emails. "Patrick is so naive, he'll never see it coming," I quoted. "By the time he figures out what's happening, we'll be in Arizona, and he'll be in prison." Renee was crying now, but I wasn't finished. "The best part is, That everyone will believe he's guilty because men like him always think they're smarter than everyone else. I continued reading. He'll lose everything, and no one will feel sorry for him because they'll think he deserved it. The room was completely silent now. Even the hotel staff had stopped serving drinks to listen. Well, I said, closing the folder, it turns out they were half right. Someone did lose everything, and no one feels sorry for them, but it wasn't me. I walked across the room to where Renee was standing. She looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. "Patrick," she whispered, "please stop." "Stop what? Telling the truth? Isn't that what you should have done months ago? I know I hurt you, but this is cruel." "Cruel?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Renee, you tried to send me to prison for crimes you committed. You were going to take everything I've worked for and use it to start a new life with your lover. And you think I'm being cruel by telling people about it?" Marc had given up trying to leave and was now standing behind me. "Patrick, that's enough. You've made your point." I turned to face him. "Have I? Because I'm not sure everyone understands exactly what kind of people you are." "We made mistakes," Marc said, "but we're paying for them." "No," I replied. "You got caught. There's a difference." I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recorder app. "Would you like to hear the conversation you had with Renee last week? The one where you discussed fleeing to a non-extradition country?" Marc's face went gray. "You're recording us?" "I'm documenting everything you do and say, just like you documented everything about me when you were planning to destroy my life." I looked around the room at the crowd of business leaders, lawyers, and executives who were hanging on every word. "You see, ladies and gentlemen, these two aren't just criminals. They're predators. They target successful people, gain their trust, and then systematically destroy them for profit. Marc has done this before, at least twice that we know of. Renee was just his latest accomplice." Angela Ainsley stepped forward. "That's right," she said in a clear, carrying voice. "My husband is a serial manipulator who uses affairs to commit financial crimes. I've been investigating his activities for months, and Mr. Cole isn't his first victim." The crowd was buzzing now, people pulling out phones to record the confrontation. "This is harassment," Renee said desperately. "You can't do this to us." "I can do exactly this to you," I replied, "because unlike everything you did to me, this is legal. It's called telling the truth in a public place." I looked around the room one more time. "I want everyone here to remember this moment. Remember their faces, remember their names, and remember what they're capable of. Because people like this don't change. They just find new victims." Marc was backing toward the exit again. "Come on, Renee, we don't have to listen to this." "Actually, you do," Pete said, blocking their path again. "Because you're both wearing ankle monitors, and your bail conditions require you to stay in Milwaukee County, so you're not going anywhere." That's when Renee finally broke down completely. She collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably, while Marc stood frozen in the middle of the room like a deer in headlights. "This is what justice looks like," I announced to the crowd. "Not just criminal charges and financial penalties, but public accountability. These people tried to destroy an innocent man's life for money. They deserve to have everyone know exactly who they are." I walked back to the bar, ordered a bourbon, and watched as the crowd slowly dispersed. Some people approached Renee and Marc, but not to offer comfort. They wanted to ask questions, to satisfy their curiosity about the criminals in their midst. By 9 o'clock, both Renee and Marc had left, escorted out by hotel security after several guests complained about their presence. I finished my drink and headed home, satisfied that I'd accomplished everything I'd set out to do. They'd wanted to destroy my reputation to cover their crimes. Instead, they'd destroyed their own reputations and accomplished nothing except ensuring they'd never be trusted again. As I drove through the quiet streets of Milwaukee, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this whole nightmare began. Peace. Not happiness. That would come later, if it came at all, but the deep peace that comes from knowing you fought back against injustice and won. The criminal trials would take months, maybe years, but the real punishment had already been delivered. Marc and Renee would spend the rest of their lives being known as the couple who tried to frame an innocent man and failed. Every job application, every relationship, every attempt to rebuild their lives would be shadowed by what they'd done. They'd gambled everything on their ability to destroy me, and they'd lost, completely and permanently. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a moment, looking at the house I'd almost lost. Tomorrow, I'd start rebuilding my life. I'd find new friends to replace the ones who'd believed their lies. I'd grow my business beyond anything I'd previously imagined. I'd prove that good people can fight back against predators and win. But tonight, I was content to simply know that justice had been served.